Welcome to the Florida Society of Nephrology podcast. I'm Dr. Nabeel Aslam, President of the Florida Society of Nephrology and a consultant nephrologist at Mayo Clinic, Florida. I'm so glad you are joining us for our second episode. This podcast is all about sharing the great work being done by nephrologists across Florida, whether that's research, education, quality improvement, or innovation in patient care. Our hope is that these conversations not only highlight exciting ideas, but also bring our nephrology community closer together and spark new connections and collaborations along the way. I'm especially happy to welcome Dr. Arvind Madan to the podcast today to discuss his recent publication in Kidney International Reports about povetacicept, dual APRIL and BAFF inhibitor for IgA nephropathy and primary membranous nephropathy. Dr. Madan is the immediate past president of the Florida Society of Nephrology and a valued member of our nephrology community here in Florida. He's a nephrologist with Central Florida Kidney Specialists and has been actively involved in clinical trials in glomerular disease, helping move forward new therapies. It's wonderful to have you with us today, Dr. Madan.
It is my pleasure, Nabeel. Nice to see you again.
Wonderful. So before we dive into the study, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what drew you into nephrology and glomerular disease research and some of your extracurricular activities?
So, I am in Central Florida. I'm in Orlando. So fondly call myself a Mickey Mouse nephrologist. And I am in a large group of about 25 providers and all single specialty nephrology. I joined this group in 2001, and I was number nine at that point in my, number of partners. I was number nine. Now we have 24. And essentially, nephrology was not something that I grew up thinking that I will become a nephrologist. But as my training went along, you kind of learned that the smartest people, when you're rounding in the hospitals or the wards, whether back in India or here, are nephrologists. Even then, it took me a while to get used to the idea, and I was very investigative kind of a guy in general, an investigative mind. And here you have a bunch of labs, and you are deciphering your, diagnosis in nephrology. So that kind of got me intrigued versus any other specialty. So that's how I landed up in nephrology, and this is my job for now about 25 years. So I'm staying here for sure. I have a great set of partners that I work with. And one of the advantages of this group is that since we are a large group, we have a lot of patients in general across different etiologies. And working as a clinical trialist within the group, I have an advantage that I have a set of patients that I can draw from. And glomerular disease, as we know, is having a moment where because of the investigative work and the pathophysiology, the pharma is more interested in developing drugs. And with the KHI initiative, with the ASN and FDA, that the drugs can move forward. So it actually gives me a lot of satisfaction, to be honest, every morning when I get to work, that if I'm doing something in a clinical trial for a glomerular disease patient versus 10 years ago, where it would be either a toxic drug or prepare for dialysis. So that is my motivation at this stage of my career, pretty much.
Oh, that's fantastic. You're right that in glomerular diseases, we are having a new golden era for the development of neurotherapeutics. So for listeners who may not be as deep into glomerular diseases as you and I have been, can you explain what makes targeting both BAFF and APRIL so interesting before we get into the details of your study?
Yes, that's a great question, Nabil. So one of the things that as a nephrologist in general, nothing to do with the glomerular for now, this section, is that we tend to give away every possible therapeutic options that we created in nephrology. Example, the cardiologist kept echo, the heart cath, stress test within their own practice. nephrologists gave away ultrasounds, gave away interventional, and so on and so forth. And now I think now the moment in glomerular disease is going to be learning about immunology. We all agree that most of these glomerular diseases are autoimmune or immune driven. So we will now have to force ourselves to learn immunology, maybe from our rheumatology colleagues as an example, that you will need to learn the B cell population and what it can do. So in that scope of things with the B cells, BAFF and APRIL play a very important role in maturing the B cell all the way to the plasma cell. BAFF comes early on in the life of B cell, from immature B cell onwards, and APRIL plays a role in maintaining them and especially the survival of plasma cells. So when you look at a disease that is driven by a B cell, meaning antibody production leading from the plasma cell after a B cell, what we're trying to achieve here is slow down the progression of the B cell to a antibody producing cell. As a result, in the scope of IgA, that you will reduce the production of galactose deficient IgA, and in the scope of membranous, you will reduce the anti-PLA2R. So BAFF and APRIL play a very important role. They both belong in TNF superfamily group, and they have very specific roles on the B cell, and there are receptors for them on B cells. So BAFF comes early on in the life of a B cell, and the APRIL comes a little later.
That's very good. Thank you for explaining that for the listeners where the BAFF and the APRIL are. So what got you interested in studying povetacicept for IgA nephropathy and membranous nephropathy?
So the way that actually started was I was, we had started our clinical trial division, and I was approached by Alpine Immune Sciences, which was the manufacturer of povetacicept. And they approached me that if I will be willing to do a clinical trial with them in IgA, membranous, lupus nephritis, and ANCA vasculitis. Originally it's called Ruby 3 study. It was a basket study. And considering that we have a large population of IgA patients, I kind of volunteered. I said, yes, I will definitely want to participate. And once it was an open label study, so once I started, it was kind of an easy recruitment for us because of being the open label design. And once I saw the results in the patients, how they were improving, I really got encouraged. And honestly speaking, I educated myself afterwards as to what BAFF and APRIL mean in the cycle of the B cell, like I told you before. So that actually really got me excited. And then some of my partners who have IgA patients stuff to treat, and they got very excited with the results the patients were achieving, and they were all congratulating me that as if I made the drug, but I'm just the medium in getting that done. So I was actually very happy to help the patients, and the results were actually pretty good, and the patients are very happy as well. So that's how it started.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, looking at the results of this preliminary phase 1-2 study, the proteinuria and biomarker response were very impressive. Would you describe for the listeners the key findings of this trial, and how do you think about those results in terms of what they could actually mean for the patients?
So, like I said, there were four cohorts in this study: IgA, membranous, primary membranous, lupus nephritis, and ANCA vasculitis. So we started with the IgA, and it is a phase 1/2 study. So it is almost like a dose finding at the same time as safety, and has efficacy, but efficacy is not the primary endpoint. And it was all open label, and there were two doses, 80 milligram and a 240 milligram doses in all cohorts. But they had to start with the low dose if the safety is met, and then the safety committee who meets will open the cohort for 240 milligrams. We started with IgA, and obviously they had a requirement of the UPCR at a certain level, the GFR at a certain level before the patient can enroll. And in the beginning, when you see the results, you will see the reduction of the proteinuria. It starts to happen pretty early on within week 12, there is a significant reduction in UPCR. And the study published is up to week 48, and you see the reduction of about 64% in the UPCR. And the good news is the GFR, I know it's not a long-term data, but the GFR remains stable throughout the process. And the GD-IgA had a dramatic drop within week 12, and it is maintained throughout the study. So this actually is exciting that this class of drugs eventually translates into a meaningful reduction in the UPCR. And our hope is that this leads to stabilization of GFR over a 2-year period, which is being studied in a phase 3, which is a placebo-controlled trial.
Great. And there was some membranous patient as well. Can you describe a little bit about those patients?
So in membranous cohort, it was not a big number of patients. They had, I think, 10 patients about total. And essentially, everybody was only on the low dose in membranous. And it became more of a proof of concept at this point. And then it has already now led to a study called Olympus trial, which is a phase 2b/3 for membranous as well. And membranous patients, they had a different requirement of the UPCR and GFR, and they used the anti-PLA2 positivity as one of the requirements to get in. And essentially what you're looking at is reduction in the UPCR again, as well as the anti-PLA2 reduction in those patients. And if you see the results in the cohort right here, they have two cohorts. They took patients that were higher UPCR, meaning more than 3.5 grams, or less than 3.5 grams, but more than 2 grams. So there were two subgroups. If you look at the study, the reduction in the proteinuria is significant in both the groups. And if you look at the anti-PLA2, it had a dramatic decline as well, depending on, it did not matter what group you were in, whether the high proteinuria or the medium proteinuria. So the reduction in the anti-PLA2 was also very significant. And like I said, it is already in phase 3 now.
Great. So that's very promising. But of course, this was a phase 1/2 study. So safety was such an important part of this study. What did you learn about the tolerability of the drug, and what should clinician keep in mind that once this drug is approved? What were the early signals in terms of safety profile?
So I actually had a significant number of patients in this clinical trial for one particular site. In my experience during the study, because since everything is open label, I know everybody getting the drug, the side effect profile was actually very well tolerated. This was not something that a lot of patients complained about any issues. Injection site reactions were minimal. It's a once a month sub-Q injection. However, since we are dealing with a B cell therapy, one of the cautions has been to always look for IgG levels, meaning hypogammaglobulinemia, in this class of drugs in general. Overall, the hypogammaglobulinemia was actually not very high or significant, and they had a very well-defined preset definition of what they're going to call hypogammaglobulinemia. Not every study or every trial in this arena with the medications defines that upfront. But in our study here with povetacicept, it was very well tolerated and did not have any major side effects. And remember, some of this was early on in 2022, and COVID was still around, but we did not have any significant, adverse events or adverse events leading to discontinuation because of the side effects.
So generally, what you're describing is it's well tolerated, but of course, like any immunosuppressant medication, there's going to be a risk of infections and other effects like hypogammaglobulinemia, which will need to be managed in these patients. So that's great. So final question I have for you is looking ahead, what excites you about where this therapy could fit in the future, not only for IgA and membranous, but for the other immune-mediated glomerular disorders?
So I think as you will see, most of the GNs are now becoming very what is called the antibody-driven GNs, be it FSGS or minimal change, and we already know about lupus and IgA and membranous. So I think this class of drugs is, in general, is going to be very exciting for nephrologists. I do not know the duration of therapy yet because the clinical trials that are ongoing are 2+ years. The patients are still on the medication. However, I think we will have to develop more biomarkers that can guide us as to when the therapy can be stopped or restarted as needed. But I think it's very exciting chapter in the field of nephrology, especially for the rare disease patients with the GNs, that instead of taking those cytotoxic drugs that can wreak havoc on the other body systems, not just the immune system, this will be very innocuous compared to the other agents that we have had. Now, but I'm giving the caution that this is a lifelong therapy at this point, unless we change things. And I think we will learn as we go along, but it will give you a great therapeutic option in patients with IgA, membranous, hopefully in the other GNs as well. And honestly speaking, personally, I would like to see this being used in lupus nephritis as well.
That's great. Thank you. So, as we come to the end of today's episode, I want to thank Dr. Madan for taking the time to join us and share his thoughts on this exciting and important work. It was a real pleasure to have this conversation, and I'm grateful for his contribution to not only to this discussion, but also to a broader nephrology community here in Florida. I also want to thank each of you for listening. My hope is that these conversations feel meaningful, practical, and inspiring, and that they remind us of the incredible work being done by our colleagues across the state. One of the things I value most about this podcast is the chance to learn from one another and to stay connected as a community. And if you or someone you know would like to join us on the future episode to share your research, educational efforts, and to work to improve patient care, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at aslam.nabeel@mayo.edu. This podcast is meant to be a shared space for all of us in the Florida nephrology community to celebrate ideas, innovation, and the work that ultimately helps our patients. Thank you again for spending this time with us, and I look forward to having you join us for the next episode of the FSN podcast.